Welcome to the continuation for November Part 1. We've had the first 3, and now you have to do numbers 4, 5, and 6. Why did Holling think Mr. Guarashi was brave? What does Holling like about the line? What is the right answer in Mr. Petrelli's class? I went to school early the next day, since I needed some private place to practice the curses. When I reached the 3rd floor, I found Mr. Vendleri holding a ladder steady in the middle of the hall. He had half a dozen spring traps in his hand, which he was holding up toward Mr. Guarashi. I could see only Mr. Guarashi's legs, since the rest of him was poked up through an opening where he'd removed some asbestos tiles. "Hand me the rest," Mr. Guarashi called down, and Mr. Vendleri did. "Now the cheese." Mr. Vendleri reached into his bib overalls and pulled out a plastic bag with cubes of yellow cheese. "Now, I'll just pull the spring back," Mr. Guarashi said, "and then set the bait right beneath." There was a loud, sudden snap, and then it wasn't Mercy dropping down as the gentle rain on the place beneath. It was Mr. Guarashi. "Oh," he said. Not really oh, but it wasn't as good as Shakespeare, not even as good as Mrs. Baker. Mr. Guarashi looked up from the floor. His face was red, and his fingers were redder. He shook them wildly as if he wanted to separate them from the rest of his body. "Oh," he said again, but not really. "You could try the red plague rid you," I said. Mr. Guarashi, still on the ground, looked up at me. "What are you doing in school so early?" he said. "Or scurvy patch," I said. Mr. Guarashi shook his fingers again. "You're not supposed to be here this early," he said. "He saw us putting up the cages," said Mr. Vendleri. Mr. Guarashi stared at him. "This is the student who let the rats go," he said. "He already knows." Mr. Vendleri looked hard at me. Then he put his finger up to his lips. "Not a word," he said. "Toads, beetles, bats light on me if I let it out," I said. And I got the timing just right, even the little bit of spit on the beetles. Mr. Guarashi looked at me strangely, and then he slowly stood up, picked up the spring traps that had already fallen all around him, and turned back to climb up the ladder. I thought it was pretty brave of him, considering how red his fingers already were. So that's number 4. "Go to class, Hollinghood," he said. Mrs. Baker was already in her classroom. She was looking up at the ceiling when I came in, listening to the scrambling and pattering of feet scurrying across the asbestos tiles overhead. We listened together for a moment until the scurrying stopped. "Not a word, Mr. Hood," she said. "Not a word," I said, and went to my desk. "Did you finish The Tempest?" asked Mrs. Baker. "Yes," I said. "We'll see this afternoon," she said, and she turned back to a pile of essays on her desk, spreading a red plague over them with her pen. Even though I didn't have the private place to practice that I wanted, I figured I could just work on the Caliban curses to see if I could get them down just right in a pressure situation. So I whispered into my desk, "Strange stuff, the dropsy drown you," which was cheating a little because I put 2 together. But I thought it sounded right. I tried it again, thinking about Caliban and Sycorax, the rats, not the monsters in the play, because I wanted to make the strange stuff come out more like a hiss. "Strange stuff, the dropsy drown you," I whispered. "Is there something you're trying to say?" asked Mrs. Baker. I sat up. "No." "Are you speaking to someone hiding in your desk?" I shook my head. She put her red pen down. "Since there are only 2 of us in the room, a situation which has become very familiar to us these past months, and since you were speaking, I assumed that you must be addressing me. What did you say?" "Nothing." "Mr. Hood, what did you say?" "Strange stuff, the dropsy drown you." Mrs. Baker considered me for a moment. "Was that what you said?" "Yes." A curious line to recite, especially since the combination never occurs in the play. Are you trying to improve on Shakespeare? Well, I thought, I guess I just like the rhythm of it. And that is number 5. The rhythm of it. Yes. Mrs. Baker considered this for a moment. Then she nodded. So do I, she said, and turned back to spreading the red plague with her red pen. That had been close, but I watched her with something like amazement. She had known the curses, both of them, which means she'd read the play, and she still let me read it. Whatever she was plotting now, it was a whole lot more devious than I'd given her credit for. I decided to ease into things more naturally, to let the Caliban curses come where they might fit in without any fuss. At lunch, I found that my mother had given me a bologna sandwich with no mayo, a stalk of celery that had been wilted since the weekend, and a cookie with something growing on it that wasn't supposed to be there. Strange stuff, I whispered. At lunch, Doug Switek's brother lurched across the field, with grade 6s scurrying out of his way as if he was a southwest wind about to blister them all over. Thou jesting monkey, thou, I said, but not so that he could hear it. Right after lunch recess, I found that the grade 8s had filled the boys' restroom with smoke, so thick you couldn't even smell the disinfectant. Apes with foreheads villainous low, I said, but not so they could hear it. In geography, Mr. Petrelli announced a unit called the Mississippi River and You. I raised my hand and told Mr. Petrelli that I had never been to the Mississippi River, and I had no plans to go anytime soon. I didn't feel like I had any personal stake in it at all, so I didn't understand the you part. Must all history center around your own personal experience, Hood? Mr. Petrelli asked. It did seem that since we were talking about the Mississippi River and you, or in this case me, one possible answer to his question would be yes. But in Camillo Junior High, and especially in Mr. Petrelli's class, the right answer is usually just to shut up. And that is number 6. So we'll finish November part 2 tomorrow.